Let's talk about the legality of a lot of this news here in the last 24 hours. Frank Figliuzzi is back with us today, former assistant director for the FBI's counterintelligence division, and Duke law professor Samuel Buell, a former federal prosecutor who led the Enron task force. So, gentlemen, nice to have both of you on. And Frank, let me just start with this. What do you make of the president's tweet this morning calling this witness, Papadopoulos, this former advisor, coffee boy, depending on, who you're talking to, as how they characterize him, a liar?
Brooke, what this reminds me of throughout my FBI career is dozens of wiretaps of drug rings. So you wiretap a drug ring and you know what you hear? Who's going to be the courier today? Who are we sending out as the mule who's expendable, who's throwaway, who will give us plausible deniability when he's caught with 10 kilos of cocaine? In this case, we're seeing something similar, and that's Papadopoulos. We have people saying, Manafort saying, DT's not going to do these meetings. You are. It's going to stay at a low level. That's very reminiscent of listening to a drug cartel.
That I hadn't heard before, Frank. Samuel, what sticks out to you about this guilty plea?
Well, I think it shows a couple of things. I mean, the headline story obviously is the over and above what we already had on the Trump Tower meeting. This is, getting closer and closer to outright kind of quid pro quo exchange discussions between the campaign and Russia about information and access to Donald Trump. The word collusion, at least as it's being used from the White House press briefing room podium now, has completely lost all meaning. If this isn't collusion, I don't know what is. This is certainly evidence of a concerted effort to create that kind of an exchange. So that's clearly the headline here, and there's just inevitably going to be more to come. So what we see here is the first really solid evidence that Mueller has acquired on that front, the first evidence. And the fact that he's willing to use false statement charges to prosecute people for lying in FBI interviews makes it highly likely that there are going to be other individuals in those same situations, and they may have additional evidence. So really, I think this is just the first shoe to drop.
Samuel, let me stay with you just back to the point that I led with on how the president this morning called George Papadopoulos a liar on Twitter. How problematic is that to have the president going after a cooperating witness? Does it matter?
Well, it's a little hard to say that sort of taking a shot in public at somebody's credibility is obstruction of justice on its own or anything like that. But it's very unbecoming conduct. It's not the kind of thing that a lawyer would want a client saying or doing. The White House, it just doesn't seem to be able to keep its strategy straight here. I don't know what their argument is. The guy did do something wrong, and he was off on a frolic and detour, wasn't operating with campaign authorization, or what he did wasn't collusion at all or an effort towards that, so there's nothing wrong with it, or none of it happened at all, and he's a liar. I mean, normally when you're putting together a defense and you're trying to confront allegations, you want to come up with some kind of a consistent strategy, and the president isn't even consistent with his own press secretary, much less what the lawyers are saying. So I don't think this gets anybody in any particular legal trouble, but it's certainly bad strategy when you're defending yourself.
Sure. Frank, one of the big questions, and I don't know how you could relate this to the drug cartel metaphor here, but why did Papadopoulos feel the need to lie to the feds in the first place?
Yeah, I think Mr. Papadopoulos was in over his head. I think that he saw himself as a bigger player than he was, wanted to protect his higher ups. It's very, very common for this to happen at all levels of criminal activity. But what people should be very worried about.
What this?
For people to make an addition, right, an initial denial, right? It's just the nature of the beast. But once that happens and once they're confronted with it and they decide to flip, as drug couriers often do, as we attempt to work our way up, people need to be worrying about when did George start cooperating, how many phone calls and emails were recorded by the FBI. In fact, I'll tell you this, everybody's focusing on this Dulles airport arrest of Papadopoulos, right, July 26th. What this smacks of is a coordinated, mutually agreed upon arrest scenario where George was contacted and said, the FBI says, George, we're going to need your help on this. We don't want to come to your house. You need to come back home and you need to agree to cooperate. My guess is that's what transpired. And this is almost an arranged arrest, not to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think Frank is absolutely right. And what's remarkable about this is, this is standard operating procedure in criminal investigations involving covert organizations, whether they be drug cartels, the mafia, what have you. But to see this happening under the Klieg lights of the Mueller Russia investigation, I mean, the fact that Mueller could come in as special counsel and without anybody knowing about it, produce and flip a witness like this from within the Trump campaign and possibly use that individual, we don't know yet, but possibly to have conversations with people, to record conversations, when everybody in the world is watching this thing under a microscope, is just amazing. And it tells you something about how this crew that Mueller is investigating just has a kind of recklessness about it. You would think that everybody would have stopped talking to everybody the minute this thing got off the ground in the spring, and that doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah.
And so that would suggest there are going to be more similar situations that are going to surface.
I think to that end, and just concluding this, the fact that nothing leaked, that no one knew a darn thing about the Papadopoulos piece of this whole web speaks volumes to how much we don't know and how much more we may keep going. Frank and Samuel, thank you, gentlemen, so very much for today. Coming up next here on CNN, sources are telling us that Steve Bannon